Hello everyone, in this video I'm going to show you how to build a simple paludarium for Lepidothelphusa SP Crabs, commonly known as Panda Crabs or Sarawak Land Crabs. This build is going to meet all the requirements for this species of crab, but it's also going to be simple enough that anyone can make it without spending a ton of money. Putting it into perspective, it will probably cost you more money to buy a suitable population of crabs than everything else required to set up an ecosystem paludarium like this one. First things first though, if you haven't done your research yet on Lepidothelphusa crabs, make sure you check out the link in the description because it's a full care guide. There's a lot more to it than just making a tank for them. They aren't essentially a beginner's crab and are more suitable to intermediate and expert hobbyists. But that said, if you do all your research, even if you're completely new to the hobby, you can keep these crabs without any issues. To begin, you'll need a tank that's at least 10 gallons, roughly 38 litres. Don't go any smaller than that. I suggest something around 60 centimetres by 30 centimetres by 30 centimetres. But ideally aim for something that's about 80 by 30 by 30. I'll leave the imperial measurements up on the screen as well. This tank we're going to be using today is 60 by 30 by 30, so it's the minimum size requirement. So this will give you a good base start on roughly what it's going to look like. So the first thing to do is add a land and water barrier. I'm just using greystone for this. It's really cheap, really easy to find, and I got this stuff here for free, so that's going to keep the cost down. It also has a pretty decent look about it with some nice texture. As this process always takes the longest, this is what I've come up with so far, so if you're doing this yourself, just take your time with it and don't rush anything because it does take a while to get perfect. As Lepidothelphusa SP Crabs spend most of their time in water, you'll need to make sure you have at least 70% of the tank water and the rest could be rocks and land. For a filter, I'm just using a small SunSun pump at the back of the tank, which I'm going to use to run a small waterfall and as well to do some filtration in this tank. It's just connected to some filter foam and a little bit of tubing, and I've also wrapped the pump head in some foam to dampen any vibrations. This is important because if you don't do this, there is a chance that the pump will vibrate on the glass and start to annoy you quite a lot. Plus it's probably pretty uncomfortable for the crabs as well. Next we fill in the land portion of the tank with leca or clay balls. This will be our substrate and the base that we build our land section on top of. Remember to build the base a little bit higher so that the soil always stays above the water and the water can drain through it. Next I'm going to be adding sand to the tank. Definitely use sand for Lepidothelphusa crabs. They don't generally like gravel. Normally I don't add sand at this stage of the tank. Normally I'll do the soil and the plant section first just so I don't spill soil on top of the sand. But in this situation, I'm going to be doing a quick test of the pump to make sure it's all working before I do the final planting stage. So I want the sand in to see how the water coming out of the waterfall is going to affect the sand. I don't want it to be too strong because I don't want it to be pushing the sand everywhere. However, with the way I have the pipe set up, it shouldn't be too much power coming out of this one. It's going to be a nice gentle trickle and nothing too powerful. I've just used a bit of super glue to attach the tube to the top of the rock. I'll cover this up so it doesn't look as ugly using some moss or some of the creeping ferns or creeping vines. I highly suggest testing your pump works well before you finish the project because if it does vibrate, if it does make noise, it doesn't flow how you want it to, it's easier to take it all apart and replant it than strip it all back once you've already planted everything. So definitely make sure you double check before you finish your entire setup. Before adding the soil, we need to add a barrier to keep the soil out of the water. Weed matting works really well for this, but you can use window screening or any other similar materials that you have lying around. I'm going to be using a simple set of plants for this. A lot of this stuff's just stuff I already had. For this, we're using some Pilea, some moss, some Monte Carlo, and a few bits of Ficus Pumila that I have lying around. Again, you can use whatever you like, as long as it likes a humid environment. So I also suggest ferns if you do have those. Ferns are really good in humid environments and don't mind being too wet. After adding the weed matting, we can add our soil. I'm just using an organic fern mixture for this, but you can use any mix you like as long as it's fertilizer and chemical free. A lot of the paludarium and terrarium mixes work really well for this. Just make sure when you add the soil, it's deep enough to plant into, and there's not really a need to go too deep if you don't have to. So with the planting done, we can move on to the water section. To make the water section a little more interesting, I'm going to add some small rocks and a larger stone as a line of sight barrier in the middle of the tank. This will slightly keep a bit of a block between the left and right side just to break up any conflicts if the crabs want to avoid each other. You can also add some wood to the mix if you like. However, I'm not going to be doing that this time because I don't have anything available that I actually think will work well in this tank. For the finishing touches, I'm just scattering some Bucephalandra around the water section and adding some Salvinia to extract any nutrients that may find their way into the water. You can use any floating plants you like, however I find Salvinia really good because it's not invasive like duckweed and the roots don't get really long like other plants like frogbit. That's pretty much the tank ready. Just remember that before adding your crabs, you should wait at least 1 month and check your water parameters are stable before adding anything. Ideally, if you have the time, I suggest waiting 3 months. You'll get a lot better stability, your plants will grow in, and there's less chance of your crabs destroying the tank as soon as they get in. One final thing, remember when you're adding your crabs to the tank, make sure you place them on the land section so that they can acclimate to the water when they're ready. Don't just drop them straight into the water, because if you have quite a big temperature difference, you might give them a shock, which could end up leading to them dying. As always, if you did skip ahead to the end, make sure you check out the Lepidothelphusa care guide. I'll leave that linked in the description. That's important as well. And as always, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you in another video. Cheers everyone.